welcome to Faithful Understanding, a podcast where we talk about faith and how it relates to the culture today. My name is Ethan, and today I am joined by Cassandra and John. Both Cassandra and John work as chaplains at the University of Canterbury, and today we're going to talk a bit about what they do as chaplains to support students at university, the biggest struggles students go through while studying, and both Cassandra and John are going to offer their advice to all of you who are currently studying or thinking about studying in the future. John and Cassandra, thank you for joining me.
Hello.
Happy to be here.
Cool. So, John, let's start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a chaplain?
Sure. I mean, when I was maybe 17 on the campus of the University of Canterbury, I was an undergraduate. I studied really hard. I burned out. I collapsed quite badly. And the chaplaincy was part of me regaining control of my life. They gave me the spiritual support that I needed to pick myself up and start again. And so I've always had an affection for the University of Canterbury. I love it as a place. It's the place where I learned how to love God and learned how to be a person, really. And so when the job came up, I've done lots of other things. I worked with the homeless and with the elderly and a disability chaplain and a bunch of other stuff. And one of my friends shoved the application packet at me and said, "You know you have a doctorate, right?" And my PhD is in English Lit. And I said, "Yes." And he said, "You're qualified for this. You should go for it." And just because he told me to, well, I thought, well, I'll pray over it, which is Christian code for I'm not going to do anything. And then I felt really strongly that I should take the meeting. I thought, well, I'm not going to take the job, but I will take the meeting. So I came onto the University of Canterbury and met my younger self walking in the same English department quadrangle where I used to hang out, and thought, heck, I love this place. And there was a wonderful moment of welcome and reunion, and I went, I think I'm going to take the job.
Well,
so I did.
Wow, that's great. And so talking about your moments of, was there any doubt at all that when you accepted the job to do this, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have taken this? Or was it something that you're very much like, I'm where I'm supposed to be?
Well, chaplaincy is a very unconventional job. It has a very broad job description. Nobody is really sure what it is that you do because it involves pastoring the people in front of you, and the people in front of you change all the time. So what a chaplain has to do for each person is very varied and different. And I used to be, at least undergraduate me, was quite a rigid person. And I like the feeling that I know what I'm doing and I know when it's supposed to happen and I know what my job description is. And in a sense, chaplaincy has knocked all of that out of me. You have to embrace the person who comes in to your office, sometimes quite literally. There's very little structure in a sense. We have much more freedom than your average parish priest has to do pastoral things and to speak into people's lives and to love the people in front of us. That is a beautiful thing, and the reason I have the best job in the world. It's also the reason why I thought twice. Am I ready to come into pastor several thousand students and 3,000 staff? We have a wonderful team. But if you don't think twice about that, you probably haven't felt the weight of it. And when I did, my love was stronger than my fear. And I jumped.
Wow, that's amazing. What about you, Cassandra? How did you get involved in doing this work?
Yeah, well, it wasn't on my 5-year plan when I was studying at university. I started studying psychology and actually had started a PhD in psychology. And I'd been involved with the chaplaincy at Victoria University sort of my whole time while I was studying. And it was a really important place for me in terms of having my questions about faith taken seriously, probably for the first time. I came from a small Anglican parish, which was super lovely, but none of them really knew what to do with a very academically wired young person who was starting to ask a lot of faith questions.
Right.
So they gave me a book, and I didn't really want a book. I wanted a conversation. But then I also found studying psychology that questions of faith weren't considered serious or real questions. I studied a particularly scientific materialist end of psychology. Psychology is broad. Unfortunately, the part I was in had no time for God and had no time for anything that you couldn't measure. But the chaplaincy was a place where my questions of faith were taken seriously, and it was crucial to my continuing to be a Christian throughout my studies. And I started a PhD in psychology, but actually by the grace of God, I did not continue it for a variety of reasons. But in that intervening time, I went I did the Venn Residential Fellowship, which is a formational theological program in Auckland, and started to ask the question of like, why are questions of faith not reasonable? Like, who said that? Were they right? And with some really good support, I found out that in fact it's hard to get away from the question of faith when it comes to knowing things about the world. That everyone has faith commitments wherever you are. And so I sort of started to put the world back together and came back to Wellington and started working for the chaplaincy, which was a bit of a surprise in some ways, but kind of similarly to John, it had been really important in my life. And there was just a joy and a love for studying, for being at university, for that phase of life. So that's how I became a chaplain, and I continued to be a chaplain. I moved to Christchurch a couple of years ago, and I knew John, and at that time there weren't any chaplaincy jobs going, but when one came up, John messaged me and said, "What are you up to?" And so here we are again.
Nice. Cool. So some people listening might think, okay, a chaplain is something to do with church or Christianity, and they do stuff at university, but I don't actually know what it is that they do. So maybe, Cassandra, do you want to touch a little bit on what does a chaplain actually do?
Yeah, what do we actually do? We do a variety of things. The bread and butter is one-on-one conversations with students and staff, Christian and non-Christian, who find us because they haven't found a place elsewhere to ask their questions. Sometimes they're directly about things we would think of as spiritual or faith, and sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're feeling overwhelmed and they want to talk to someone. Or they've just, what I've noticed is some students who aren't feeling overwhelmed, they're just interested in life, and they want to have a chat about that, about like what's meaningful work, what does it mean to belong to your family. So those kinds of one-on-one conversations, planned and unplanned, is what we do. And then in between times, we plan different events to support community life at the university, including running seminars on faith-related things. Like we've done a lot of faith and science ones, helping people, wrestle, do the intellectual wrestles they need. But we also run a midweek prayer time for people who want to pray in the middle of their work or want to explore Christianity and have never come to a church, but they're at university. And then also a community lunch, which we say is because we think eating together is a spiritual value. Yeah. It's something Jesus did a lot of. And after COVID and after a lot of the fracturing of the normal community gatherings and places of belonging, it's part of the reweaving of people together. So I think, like John said, we have a lot of freedom to do the good that we see that can be done. Yeah. And, we talk to counsellors and things that work at the university, and they say, gosh, we wish we could do what you could do, just to be out there with people where they are. It's a real gift. Yeah,
wow. What about you, John? Is there anything kind of different that you might do, or what's your experience?
Yeah, I mean, the pastoral care is the major bit and the bit that we most enjoy with students and with staff. Yes, we do some intellectual formation and wrestling with issues and promoting dialogue between groups. We support our Christian clubs and all the faith clubs. And we try and humanize campus the best way that we can. It can be a very concrete and sterile place. We exist to give people warmth and kindness, but also the light of faith and the light of Christ. The other bit that's part of particularly my job is ceremonial and spiritual care, building blessings and Anzac Day. And whenever there's a serious incident, somebody dies or there's a suicide, we're quite often called either to dignify the moment with a karakia or a moment of prayer, or to help people who have been in serious incidents and car crashes, when people have been injured, moments of true and horrible pain, and also true and wonderful joy. When people are celebrating things, they're quite often like the chaplain. We've got the morning tea cart that comes around all the staff, but also we deal with those sharp edge of people's pain and people's difficulties, and sometimes we can help. That sometimes people are people of faith, and even quite often atheists and people who have no faith suddenly discover that they have spiritual values. So they call for us partly to say, hey, what can we do to mark this moment, whichever moment it is, partly to say, hey, can you help us with the expertise that you have? And sometimes we're able to spark dialogue and discussion, and to pastor institutionally as well. It's part of our job to guide the space for faith, to expand conversations that the university is having about faith. And also things like, well, has anybody planted any trees? It's quite a nasty environment in this particular lecture theatre. Can we have some chairs for people to sit in?
Right.
Even stuff as practical as that. We're on the side of human and spiritual values, and trying valiantly to grow some flowers and some grass in the middle of the concrete.
Yeah,
that's something that everybody appreciates. It's something that we're allowed to do, but it's also something that's often forgotten.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, like you said, it's forgotten. It's one of those things that I remember when I went to UC a few years ago. I went to study music. I dropped out. Yeah. But I went there with my dad, and my dad looked around, and he's a very nature guy, and he looked around and he said, "I'm very glad that you're coming here. Like, you have a space where you can be away from the noise, and you just get to." Again, it's the physical and the emotional and the spiritual all kind of coming together, and you see that and you experience that. So, yeah, overlooked sometimes, but like you said, I think it's really, really important. Before we continue, I just want to take this opportunity to talk to you about our online prayer ministry. When I'm going through a hard time or people I know are struggling, I always turn to prayer, whether that be my own personal prayer or asking someone else to pray over me. Philippians 4 says that through prayer we are to let all of our troubles known, and that we will receive the peace of God. We have a prayer team standing by who are ready to help you in your prayer journey. In the description below this video, we have a link to our prayer request form, which you can fill out, which tells our team what you need prayer for. As prayer is a very personal experience, we keep all of this highly confidential, which means your prayer is only shared between you, the prayer team, and God. So if you need prayer, I highly encourage you, click the link in the description and fill out your prayer request form today. I want to talk about, we see some universities, and particularly America, and people see this on their social medias, that appear as though they're drifting away from Christian values, drifting away from the church. In your guys' experience at UC, have you run into any policies or anything like that that has really challenged you because you have a perspective of, well, this is my faith and this is what I believe, and then this policy is coming through and maybe I don't fully agree with this? So have you run into something like that, and how do you sort of wrestle it?
I think the UC has historically, particularly since the new campus was built, been quite a secular place. when I was an undergraduate 15 years ago, I walked into my first English lecture wearing my I Love Jesus t-shirt. I was 17, a Pentecostal boy, and my lecturer pointed at me and said, I hate your God, and I hate your t-shirt.
Yeah.
And that old hostility for faith used to be there. I think to a large extent, my reflection on coming back is that it's gone away.
Right.
And there are still pockets where people are hostile to faith, either because their discipline kind of militates towards it, like psychology does, and Cassandra's experience. And there are some other departments like that. And there are also people who have angst about church for various reasons, and some of them good and some of them not so good. But I think my experience at UC has been one of profound hospitality. Mm. I think Māori and Pacific peoples have brought to us the importance of faith in a way that hasn't happened in the United States. Mm. And also, obviously when you say, I'm the God guy and I think we should do A, B, and C, there's a negotiation that happens, and there'll be people who are hostile, there'll be people who don't understand why you're saying that, and there'll be people who support you. And the general experience that I've had at UC is that everyone is open to talking and to negotiation about things like the space that we need, about the special arrangements for people of faith, about the importance of faith and spiritual values in general. There's still some way to go in terms of progress. There are still old habits and policies which might be sometimes unhelpful, but my experience has been that UC wants to be a place of hospitality for people of faith, and that they want to learn what that means, and they want to learn what's important to us. The leaders that I've talked to, including in the 150th anniversary we just had, were very clear about the importance of people of faith and the contribution that all the faiths play, and they want to grow in partnership. And there's a lot of love among church people and church leaders, and also local faith groups for UC. We send our children there. The bishop was a UC alumni. And we're too small a country, really, to get too hostile too quickly. And I think that is a profound grace. Cassandra, you have a thought?
I would just second all of what John said.
Sure.
I think UC is really put an emphasis on valuing diversity and followed through on that. They have a Muslim wellbeing advisor now who works with students around like Ramadan and fasting and how to negotiate their exams and assessments around that. If there's a better time of day to sit an exam if you're fasting, things like that are really great. Yeah. Really putting into practice this value of diversity and what that means for different things that happen in a university.
Oh, that's really encouraging. And before we go on to student-focused conversation, how has your role impacted your personal faith journeys? Cassandra, do you want to?
It's really built my confidence in the goodness of God and the truth of the scriptures. And I don't think I expected that when I started in chaplaincy. And it's actually particularly become apparent to me when students come in, and a handful of them will, they say, I don't want to talk about religion, don't want to talk about faith, I just want to talk about this issue that I'm here to talk about. And what I've really seen in those moments is how there isn't a better story to live out of. I think of a student who came to me who just had a lot of angst about work and vocation and what they were doing with their life. And the thought that they might not succeed was absolutely terrifying to them. Now, from a Christian perspective, we'd call that idolatry.
Sure.
And I wouldn't never use that word with a student in that context, but it really reminded me of the words of Peter, like, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. And I think I've seen that as I've watched students try and live out of other stories, that there actually isn't a better one than the God who loves you, who sent his son for you, who there is a wise and good way to live in the world. So it's actually been really confidence building.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's something that in my own personal walk of faith that I would say recently I've actually become aware of that. I talk to other people and they have these big issues, the meaning of life and all these things. And I reflected on it and I thought, man, I don't have any of these stresses. I don't stress about these kind of things. I just get to live for God. And the good things that I do is just a way of saying thanks, really. I don't have to earn God's approval.
Yeah.
It's just a thanks for His grace. And so I can relate to that.
Yeah, because you take that piece out and you have to earn your value. And that's a really heavy burden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, especially my conversation with my guy friends, they find a lot of their worth being in their accomplishments and the things that they're able to do and the amount of money that they have or whatever they own or anything like that. And so that is something that I've noticed, and again, it helped me reflect. I'm like, that's not where I find my value. I don't find it in the things that I've accomplished or the things that I have to do or like how impressive I look or how strong I look or whatever it might be, and I think that, well, for some of my guy friends in particular, that's a message that they need to hear.
Yeah.
That's something that Christianity provides for them.
Yeah.
Is that it's not about what you have here. It's not about what you own. And that's it's an encouraging message. It takes a lot of the weight off,
It's really interesting that you say that, because what I've noticed since being at UC is that it is mostly young men who come to talk to me, which I never expected before. But it is. So I recognize what you're talking about with your guy friends. I mean, I'm like just really curious, like what's going on in the world of young men that they seem so hungry, actually, for something better. Yeah.
Maybe John, you can add to this, but I think my thoughts on it is that the culture has kind of built men up where their value is based off their achievements. They have to go out and achieve something. They have to go and do something. I don't see a lot of evidence for, well, outside of the Christian faith, that men are valued just as they are and just as they, it's very much, well, what job do you have? How much money do you have? What car do you drive? All these things. And, how strong are you? It's like, if you can tick all those boxes, then you're a valuable guy. And I think that men just lose their purpose. They're just trying to attain these things that there's no real success in it. It's like there's always something else that they have to achieve. There's always something else that they have to work towards. And I see it as this never-ending suffering that men go through to try and please the expectations of what they think they have to do.
I think you've put your finger on what I think is the big word here, which is purpose. I think as a disabled person, I am a disability chaplain. I talk to lots of disabled young men who are struggling with more or less the same thing as you. I'm not strong. My brain works differently than other people. I don't necessarily tick all the boxes. Where is my value and where is my purpose? And you see that done at UC all the time. And I think some of the older purposes that we used to have for young men, the socializing in the rugby team or in the church or in the scouts or a number of other places, those contexts have more or less faded now. And I would say about young men the same that I would say about young women and people in general. They don't do well without connection and belonging. It's something to belong to, and not just a something with purpose and moral meaning, and that it will call out of you fortitude. and courage and resilience.
Yeah.
And I think I found that purpose in the church, and I think every young man listening to this should get yourself to your local church as fast as possible and say, I have two hands, what would you like me to do with that?
Yeah.
So actually working out your purpose in the world, helping God repair the world, that is the biggest purpose that one can have. A relationship with Christ and with his church is the best relational meaning that you can have and the best connection you can have. Even with all the fish hooks and even with all the dumb people and even with bearing with the little old ladies called Mrs. Clotworthy who are very not like you, that will call out of you love and tenderness. It will make you a different person than you otherwise would be.
Yeah.
And I think we have a whole bunch of young people in general, not just young men, who are feral and burned and orphaned because they don't have purpose, they don't have relational connection, and they don't have moral meaning. And people do not do well without those three things.
Yeah. I think, your advice of go to your local church is great advice. I think when you're in that environment, first of all, it makes you think about other people and not just yourself. It gets you out of your own head. You're thinking, well, how can I help other people? How can I serve other people? And then it's kind of like when your thinking is towards others, you can kind of start to repair those things that may have happened to you. Begin to work on, what does God actually want me to do? How do I do this? And so, really good advice. I think another thing that I've noticed in men in particular is that they desire struggle and they desire responsibility, right?
Yep.
It's like if they're just given stuff all the time, like life gets boring for them, and and then they try to find their excitement in other things, like they go out and party or they'll try different drugs or whatever it is, and then when they find these things don't actually fill that purpose that they're after, then mental health goes in a bad direction. And I think that for particularly young men who are looking for that responsibility to something that they have to put their all into to work towards, I think Christianity is great for that. It's the whole Jesus said to them, carry your cross. And that's not an easy thing to do, right?
He did not say, take up your duvet.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it's in that incredible struggle where you find purpose, where you find meaning. And when you're struggling and striving towards truth, towards being itself in Jesus, that's where you find the ultimate purpose, like you were saying, John.
I also think the church gives you a team to do that with, will rub the rough edges off you, challenge you, call humility and tenderness out of you. I think if you're trying to do the struggle by yourself, you're going to end up a very competent and very lonely person.
Yeah.
I actually had a counselling lecturer say recently some of the most self-actualized people he knows are absolute jerks.
Right.
That you can become really competent and a really terrible person.
Yeah.
I have thought about many law and business graduates. You are wonderful, you're brave, you're interesting, you are very competent, and also you need to scrub floors for 3 years.
Yeah, definitely.
Life will mug you hard.
Yeah. It's pride comes before the fall, right? It's like if you're a very prideful person, and there's always bigger fish, and so you get humbled.
Competence is a beautiful thing. They use it for something.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. So we'll speak a little bit broader now, I guess. But what are some of the common issues you guys find students come to you with?
The loneliness is a big one, and it sometimes takes a while to get there. So a student will come in and, as you unpack the various layers, what's underneath that is, I'm really lonely, or is there anyone else out there like me? I feel alone. Or I don't know where I belong. I want to belong somewhere. That one's huge. And particularly for students in their second or third years when they're flashing, they're no longer in the halls and their flatmates don't talk to each other. It's really hard out there. And like John said, human beings need connection. So that is a big one. And then the other one is this question of, what am I doing with my life? And that comes up at several points in the university journey. It comes up sort of 2 weeks into the semester when you have the choice to add or drop courses, and you found a course really hard and you think, I thought I was going to do this. I'm not sure if I can. What does that mean? It comes up towards the end of the year, particularly for students who are moving on, to say, what do I do now after university? What is a meaningful life? Those questions come up a lot.
Sure.
I agree with both of those. I second belonging, social loneliness, and purpose. But I think the third one I would say, and it's in the last 20 years over the time that I've been alive, is what reality do I want to live in? I mean, we have so many virtual realities now. There are people who literally don't leave their house, and people who do leave their house who don't leave their phone. And one of the new questions that I've had to ask, or start asking, is, when was the last time you turned off your phone? When was the last time you were outside? Even things like conversation, like the one we're having, I'm looking you in the eye, and you're looking at me and nodding and performing that you're listening to me. There are people who don't know how to do that, and some of them turn up in my office. So you have all kinds of questions about what's really real, about where true love and acceptance come from, about the choices that people can make. And there are the usual choices: what kind of job you have, and what kind of faith you're going to follow, but also what kind of person you want to be. And what you're going to give your life to. Even the people who are activists have moments of crippling doubt, and of the 100 available realities, am I in the right one? What happens if I like this one better? What's for real, and where can I truly live and be at rest? And that sounds abstract until you realize it's the question we all ask: who loves me? Who accepts me? Who will come after me when I'm stuck or fragile or bleeding? And where do I find what's truly real and what's in tune with the deepest things I want to be? And that's true of very competent people as well. I've got all of these skills. What can I do in the world that will matter worth a damn?
Yeah. That's a good point. I actually find that quite competent, intelligent people seem to struggle with that the most. Is that they pick up all these skills, and they, are studying different perspectives on the purpose of life, and they're all very knowledgeable. But when you ask them, well, what do you believe? They are very hesitant. They don't know. And what
story are you living out of, and what will you give your life to? All of those are really difficult questions, and increasingly difficult, I think.
Yeah, I think there's almost a fear of wanting to live for something in particular, because in a world full of so many options, it's like, well, what if there was something better? It's like, if I commit myself to this, then I might miss out on something else.
The Archbishop of Sydney used to say, you are the generation with 100,000 options and no mission. And I think one of the many reasons that I'm a Christian, and one of the many reasons that I'm a priest, is that I found my mission. I'm at 100,000 options.
Yeah.
And there are 10,000 students trying to do the same.
Yeah, definitely. The story that I've heard, I can't remember who, but it comes to mind, is that if you go to a supermarket and you're looking for the best shampoo, and there's 1,000 different shampoos, it's like the odds that you're going to pick the best shampoo is so low, it's ridiculous. And so what would your guys' advice be to people who are looking at all these options and are like, what do I do? What do I pick here? They're paralyzed by too many choices, right?
I mean, I have an answer for the shampoo question, but I've worked that one out in my life.
Nice.
I think part of it is dealing with the fear of opportunity cost. I think acknowledging that that's going to be part of life, and getting comfortable with that, getting comfortable with what you'll say no to because you're saying yes to something. The danger, if when you get overwhelmed with choice, is you don't say yes to anything, and that's much, much, much worse. But there's also room to try things. There's room to try going to a church. Okay, that church felt weird. Okay, try another one. But then also there are often connections. Like, I feel like you follow a bit of a trail. So there'll be someone in your life and there's something going on with them that you think, that's the kind of person I want to be like. And then you get alongside them for a while, and then that leads you to the next step. And the next step, I think part of, so the choice anxiety, I think part of that is the fear of closing off options. So just acknowledge there's going to be a cost. That's part of being an adult. It's okay. But then don't freak out that you have to pick the right thing the first time. That you start somewhere, and you start by noticing what's drawing you.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I resonate with most of that. I think God wants to be known, so he sends us hints. He sends us clues. I would say, God-bothering incoming, Ethan. Brace yourself. In Romans, you start with what you know. Let your love be real. Abhor what is evil. Hold fast to what is good. Try and test all the things. So, you start with the basic intuitions that we have. You start with conscience. You start with the clues that you already have, and the people that you know who are good. And sometimes even the people you know who are not good. You start by going, well, I don't want to do that, or I do want to do that. And then you test things with a questioning and an honest heart. People of goodwill. If your faith is real and if it's true, then God doesn't mind you kicking the tires a bit. If you test it and it falls over, keep testing, keep trying, keep searching, asking, keep on asking, knocking, keep on knocking. And if that continues, for he who seeks finds. He who asks receives, and to him who knocks the door will be open. So I know a number of students who come to the chaplaincy who are not Christians yet, but are still in the middle of testing and trying things, still in the middle of thinking through things, still in the middle of praying. I would encourage everybody to make a step. If you don't know where to start, tell God that you don't know where to start, and he's going to help you. If you know where to begin, at least make a step. Read the thing you've been meaning to read. Think about the thing you've been meaning to think about. And that's a process of discernment that we have through the whole of our lives. So part of the job of the church is to teach you when you're young or youngish how to try and test all things.
Right.
Where we go for our sources of authority and what is legitimate and real and good and true and faithful, and also what to do when the test fails and things seemingly fall over. Keep seeking, keep looking, keep knocking, because in the end, God wants to be found. We are not ancient Romans. We don't need to consult omens or roll dice or any of that stuff. God steps very close to us, and he is very close to every person.
Yeah, that's so good.
And come talk to a chaplain while you're searching.
Oh, yes.
That's
yes,
what
we can help you.
we accompany. This is literally what we're here for, is the accompanying on that search. Whether it is for the right shampoo or for, your vocation and purpose and your soul.
Wisdom.
Wisdom comes in all forms. I really do have the shampoo one down, so I'm like...
Cool. How has student engagement with faith changed over the course of your tenure as chaplains?
Well, I'll leave Cassandra to talk between campuses because she has more experience there. But I think people are a lot more hungry than they used to be. I think we've moved from, oh God, I don't believe in him, to God, who or what is that? So I think people are much more open in terms of spiritual conversations. They're much more hospitable to spiritual values than perhaps they were 15 or 20 years ago. The new atheism has thankfully died because it wasn't particularly intellectually rigorous.
Yep.
But, there are fashions in this as far as what people read and the ideas in their culture. I think the internet and various other things have made the people who are spiritually searching and spiritually hungry a lot more obvious than they used to be. And they want good and solid food. And they're starving for good and solid food. And then at the other end, the people who are a bit fragile and a bit vulnerable, their vulnerabilities are more obvious.
Right.
The level of the need that they have for connection, for belonging, for somebody to talk to, all of those things, it is much bigger than I think it used to be. I don't know. I'm not a statistician, and somebody can email me if they want to argue about my footnotes. But
Sure.
My experience is people used to get a certain amount of warmth and belonging from things like family and community. I think we have increasingly a cold culture, and increasingly a culture which vulnerabilities are much more obvious. So just to have somebody smile at you and be pleased that you walked through the door, just to have somebody eat with you at the table, like an ordinary family would, just to have somebody hug you or pray with you or give you, my one of the weapons in our arsenal, and we can believe this or not, but it's true, is homemade baking.
Really?
Auntie Norma Gilmartin and Nolan Schreiber, this is your big moment. We love you dearly. They keep the chaplaincy supplied with homemade baking. Oh, nice. And the thing that makes the students sometimes literally cry is it's homemade.
Right.
Somebody cared enough to make this biscuit for me fresh this morning.
Mom.
And you're offering it to me, and as a sort of welcome and hospitality, these are really small things, but they add up to something really big, which is a spiritual hunger for home, which I think we all have.
Yeah.
And part of our vision for the chaplaincy is that it should be a place where faith is at home, but it should be a place where anybody can come and feel cared for and seen and loved, and in an entirely appropriate and decent way, warm. I think we have very few and increasingly fewer places where that happens now.
Yeah. And my own experience with talking with people, particularly in their 20s, early 30s, is that it's amazing their response when you just ask them, how are you? Like, how are you doing? And then you listen. And I can't even count the amount of times people have said to me, it'll be out in public or it'll be at work or something like that, and they say, I have to go, I'm going to cry. I feel like I'm going to cry. Or I have to stop talking to you because you're going to make me cry. And yeah, people are very vulnerable, but that vulnerability they aren't fed. And so the moment they encounter just a small taste, it's quite an overwhelming thing for them.
There's I wish I could remember who said this, but it was quoted to me recently that being in our time, being listened to is so close to being loved that the two are almost indistinguishable. And partly what that reflects is a lack of listening, lack of having people to listen to you. Yeah. So your experience doesn't surprise me that just that really ordinary act of like, how are you, and actually listening is a bit overwhelming for people because it's not happening necessarily.
Yeah, cool. So what changes have you noticed particular between universities?
Yeah, so I started at Victoria University and when I arrived at UC, one thing that I was just really surprised about was that people booked appointments with the chaplains and they'd never met the chaplains.
Right.
So this didn't happen so much at Vic. I mean, it would have happened from time to time, but I thought it was remarkable that students here, this is thanks to John's work and the work of the chaplains before, that people knew enough to think, if I want to talk to someone, I think there's something called a chaplain. And I think they would be a good person to talk to.
Right.
And I saw this, in fact, on Welcome Day this year, when we met. There was 1,500 people on campus, first years, and we talked to the 150 of them. And it was really interesting to watch new students who are overwhelmed, they've just moved or whatever, and you just sort of see them connect. They see the chaplaincy sign, and you can kind of see they have no idea what it's about. But there's some vague feeling that you're a person that's probably there to care. And just even that level of understanding, and then to approach us, I noticed that that's quite different to my experience in Wellington.
Right.
And I noticed that the Christian groups here are still gathering a lot of people. The Christians have started to drift a bit in Wellington, that they don't tend to gather en masse in the clubs as much.
Shout out to our wonderful UC Christian clubs. We see you. We love you.
Yeah, they do really great work. So yeah, different cities, different vibes.
Sure. Yeah. No, fair enough. Cool. Can you share a memorable experience where you felt you made a significant impact on a student's life?
I'm thinking of three. I'll pick one. Lovely girl who shall remain nameless from a tiny little village in Southland. And she goes to a little country church. And she came walking into the chaplaincy almost in tears. And by the time she sat down, she was crying. And I said, what's wrong? Here's a cup of tea. Here's a biscuit. Tell me what's wrong. And she said, these are bigger buildings than I've ever seen. Everybody is smarter than me. I miss my home so much. And I feel like God has abandoned me because all I can see is concrete. Wow. And I said, you know what, sweetheart? I felt exactly the same. I'm from a little town in North Canterbury. I didn't like it here. It's so big. But do you remember the first year of high school? She said, yes. I said, do you remember what it was like on the first day? And she said, oh, yes, it felt so big. And I said, it's exactly the same here. Everybody looks like they're smarter than you. They're not really. They just know an awful lot about very little. If you want to know about single-stranded binding proteins, we're your people. But they don't know what it means to be you.
Yeah.
And they don't know your family, and they don't know your faith. So why don't you tell me what you miss? We had this lovely conversation for about 40 or 45 minutes. And then she jumps across the desk and said, I thought it was just me. I thought I was feeling so stupid and small. And you've reminded me that there are people who love me. You've reminded me that God loves me. You've reminded me that there's a place for me here. And we prayed. She's still a chaplaincy regular. She comes to see me. Good. She's third year. She comes to see me every couple of weeks. To say both, I love it here, and the Lord is still with me. Good. We pray the same prayers. To have a permanent impact on somebody, to humanize the moment and to humanize the place. That's what we're for. I mean, there are other things, serious incidents. preventing suicides and things like that. Every priest has stories like that, but particularly university related stories. It's when people say either you were there for me when I needed you, your argument is interesting, I wish to hear you again on this subject. That's from Acts, but when people say, yes, it's what you've said is credible and you know your stuff, or yes, I might think more about that. Can you recommend a church for me? All of those things have happened. So not the whole loaf by any means, but we help people to get closer to where God wants them to be.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay.
I mean, my story is kind of the flip side. So sometimes we have people who journey with us for a long time, and sometimes you only meet someone once. And so I can't really claim that this had a big impact on the student because I don't know.
Sure.
But it had a big impact on me. And this was when I was in Wellington, that a student came to see me who was in pretty bad shape, kind of mental health wise, but had all the professional support. So had the counsellor, had the crisis response team. I think probably also had a psychiatrist, like was well taken care of. So that sometimes the work that we do is to connect people with those services, but this person already had all of that. And yet they came to see the chaplain with some really real struggles. And this does sometimes happen, that people come to us as what feels like a last resort, and you think, help. Like, if all of those other professionals couldn't do something, what can I possibly do? And I just really remember that moment, because I had to decide if what I was doing was actually worth something. If, the Bible that I believed in actually had something to offer. So that, I guess, like I talked about before, that kind of strengthening of faith moment. And so I opened the Anglican prayer book with this student and talked about the night prayers and this gift of the tradition of ways of praying in the dark when we're vulnerable. Because, in the mix of mental health, they also weren't sleeping very well. So talked about like what it is to pray to God in those moments. And I don't know if that had an impact, but it really forced me to contend with, what are we doing here? We care for people, we listen, we're also pointing them to God. And the chaplain who trained me would say, and I think he probably got this from Eugene Peterson, because it feels like something he would say, that part of our job is actually directing people in prayer.
Right. Wow. So, what are the biggest challenges you guys face as university chaplains? If I were in your positions, I would imagine it would be probably one of the biggest challenges, but also one of the most rewarding things would be helping those that are suicidal. That would come to mind for me. But from your experiences, what's something that you find really challenging about your role?
Well, see, that situation you've described, that's not easy, but it's also really clear what your work is in that moment.
Yeah.
I think one of the greatest struggles with our work is sometimes the lack of clarity on what our job is. Because, compared to 60 years ago, not as many people know what a chaplain is or have a thought about what they should expect from a chaplain, when they should talk to a chaplain. And, when you go to conferences, we debate back and forth all the time, should we still be called chaplains? Yeah. The flip side of that is not as much baggage. You can define it in the moment, contextually for that person, what it means that you are a chaplain. But yeah, that is one of the struggles, is that negotiation of who are you and what are you there to do? Yeah, right. You've got to really become quite a secure person. Because you're not always going to get the rewards or the affirmations that what you're doing is worthwhile or valuable.
Right.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. I think you walk in and say, I'm the God guy or I'm the chaplain. And you get everything from, oh, thank God you're here, all the way through to F off, and you shouldn't be here. And everything in between. And you don't necessarily know why people react the way that they do.
Yep.
Is it just my face? Did I do something to annoy you? Do they not like the collar I'm wearing or the label? Have they had a torrid church issue? In a sense, you have to pastor people knowing what they will tell you, which is a very different place than a church. You know, you see the same people week after week, you get to know them. No one who comes to chaplaincy has to come. Yeah. And people can come once or come twice. They can come every week or every day if they want it. And that means that you get very strong relationships with some people. There are staff regulars. There are people that love and know us. But also there's a whole wilderness full of students who all need different things and have different reactions and opinions about faith. So the thing I find most challenging is the sales part. I'm basically an introvert.
Yep.
I don't like constantly offering things that get knocked back. So you have to grow a pretty thick skin and say, well, that wasn't really about me.
Yeah.
It's about God or what that person perceives God to have been or done to them. Or they're just having a bad day. And you celebrate the beautiful things and the wonderful things that grow in the cracks. I think the lack of structure, I second that. But that's also an opportunity in the sense that you can be holistic. You can give lots more care and over a longer time than most university professionals would. And you're semi-detached from the system, which it can also be a very beautiful thing. The minus of that is that you then become invisible.
Right.
So we have some faithful and wonderful local church partners. St. Peter's is one. We recognise and celebrate every ounce of support that we get from the diocese and from the other churches that are partnered with us. But chaplaincy is quite often the thing that's intangible. Even when you count things, you know, the Anglican Church, we count everything. How to describe the value that you add and the thing that you gave and the care that you offered can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
So we're in a sense the metaphysics people.
Right.
We're talking about realities like forgiveness and goodness and belonging and faith that don't necessarily have KPIs. That is a beautiful thing because I think these are the most important part of human beings. It's also a really difficult thing to sell.
Yeah.
People who are busy and noisy and who might not necessarily see the importance of those things. So lots of opportunities and lots of things that we're on a person too.
Right. Yeah. I can. Well, part of me doesn't really understand, but part of me kind of gets it. Is people's lack of value they put on, like, doing what you guys do, helping people out, getting people to talk about things, offering them that support, that comfort, that message of, hey, you're valuable. And these things that you have going on, it's totally fine to have those, like, we can talk about these things, that's cool. And it's been tricky for me to understand how people don't find that service valuable.
Well, I mean, in one sense, like, you can't do anything about their grades. You know, we don't have influence in that sense. So in the context of a university, like, we can't write them a doctor's note.
Yeah.
We look irrelevant in that sense. But it's precisely because of that that we can value and engage with the whole person in front of us, not just the part that they need to connect with the university.
Yeah.
So it's the best spot to be in. But it's there's some things that, some fame and glory you give up when you become a chaplain.
I was going to say, you're working from a place of humility, definitely, right? Yeah, 100%. Well, conversely, what are some of the most rewarding things that you guys get to experience?
I think I have the best job in the world because I don't know what stories I'm going to hear from day to day. I mean, sometimes if I have regulars, then I'll know more or less what they've come about. But people will open their lives talk about the most important and sacred and wonderful things. And sometimes they're free to do that to a chaplain in a way that they wouldn't to a parish priest or to somebody they're going to meet over the table the next Sunday. They can come and tell me what they really think. They can invite me into a place of joy or celebration or sorrow in their lives. And that is a profound privilege, not because I like hovering over people and knowing things, but because they're offering something precious. And each person has a story. One of the things that I've figured out over my pastoral life, which hasn't been that long, is that people mostly make sense. Even if they're weird, demented or evil, if you know their story and you know how they got to from A to B, they usually make sense. It makes sense where they've got to. And in a sense, chaplaincy allows people to offer you parts of their stories, parts of their lives, things that really matter to them, things that make them bleed and things that make them smile. And I get to be there. I get to watch and to offer whatever it is that they've brought to God on their behalf and with them. And I think that is literally the best job in the world.
Yeah.
What is the most rewarding moments for me is when I see people grow in their humanity. And that means different things for different people. One of the things we do is we run a community lunch. And most of the students who come aren't Christians. But one of the happiest days of the semester for me was when one of our regulars came along and just saw me setting up and offered to help. And then got out the water jug and started pouring water. And we'd never served water at community lunch before, like ever. But his hospitality was just drawn out of him in serving others. And it genuinely, I think to this day, it's still one of the most exciting chaplaincy moments. Just seeing this student who hadn't been connected to anything, connected to something, but then participating and offering that hospitality. Without anyone saying anything, just sort of caught a whiff of the good thing. So it's anything from moments as small as that, which are actually huge, to, staff members who, and actually commonly when we're walking alongside staff, it's with regards to their family and what's going on, with their kids or with their parents, seeing those staff members turn to God with their worries. That is just as both of those ends of the spectrum. It was like growing into our humanity, and you catch glimpses of the glory of God, because it's not me that did that. But I got to see God at work, and that's the best part of the job. I think that's why I turn up.
So, yeah. I can imagine in your positions that there are a lot of situations where you talk to people and then you just don't know the rest of the story.
Yeah, and that taught me to trust the Holy Spirit, because among the junior clergy, I certainly have this. There's the idea that everything that the Lord does should involve me. In actual fact, I help the people who come for the time that they'll allow me to help them, and then they disappear. And in some cases they don't come back, and maybe even don't respond to follow-up emails, so you don't know what happened to them. And so I have a regular discipline of saying, I thank you for X and her story that she shared with me. I leave her in your hands because she's yours and not mine. And the work that you're doing with him or her, it is, in a sense, not my business. I've done my best with the half hour or the hour or whatever it is. And if people come back, I help them more if I can. But in the end, they blow in and blow out, and I have to trust the current.
I always like to think, and it'll be the same for you guys as well, when you're working with other people, is that I always pray to God. I pray, help me to be humble enough to accept that I might not be the person to help this person.
Yeah.
I might not be the person that this person needs. Help me be humble enough to accept that and to be okay with it, but help them find the person that they need. And that is something that I apply to church work. When new people come into church, I'm really happy that they're in church, but we might not see them again. And so it's about being humble enough to ask God that, well, they didn't stay here, but I pray that they find somewhere to stay.
It's even better when a student comes to see you and then you see them on campus and they just avoid you. That's happened a few times, and there's a number of reasons for that, but like it does increase that humility in you.
Duck down behind the cornflakes in the supermarket to avoid you.
Yeah. Oh, cool. So how do you guys handle subjects around mental health? And how does your faith help you in those conversations?
I think mental health is a really broad term. So partly it's working out with the person in front of you. How do we name what's going on? Is this, momentary overwhelm? It's the first 2 weeks of class. You've just moved to a new city. That's a really normal experience. Is this, an ongoing pattern? Is there a diagnosis at play? Because there are different pastoral responses in different moments.
Right.
But what I've found really helpful across those is the naming and accepting of whatever is going on. Because I think I almost want to separate out mental health and mental distress, because you can have poor mental health in the sense of like maybe up and down moods or cycles of thinking, but it's when those passions become and I'm a broken person and I'm falling apart and or I'm so messed up I'm not worth anything. That's the mental distress.
Yeah.
Is actually that when we start to reflect on what's going on and saying, I don't belong anymore. So just to name, you have depression. Hi, what's your name?
Yeah.
And accepting whatever's going on it's going on. You still have things you like, you still have things you don't like. You're going to have some thoughts about what's going on for you, but finding a way to keep a connection, to make it okay that however you've come in today, I'm really glad I get to hang out with you. I'm really glad I get to hear what's going on. That it doesn't become a pit of despair and disconnection. I think that's the thing that I think about, because we all have moments and we all have phases of life and years of life that are really hard for one reason or another. But having people that just help you stay connected. And, theologically, Christians are in a really good place to alongside people, because your value, as we talked about before, your value is not in what you can do, what your ability is. Your value is in the God that loves you, regardless of what, whether it's a good day or a bad day. What a gift.
Yeah, definitely.
For a start, I think you have to separate the mental health we're trained for and the mental health we're not. So if anyone needs trauma counselling or they're in a psychiatric episode, all of the really dangerous stuff gets done by student health and the sustained counselling in the professional sense. So we would always know when to refer. But I do have a standard template that I use when somebody's come with the sort of lower grade mental health troubles, anything from worry through to mild depression. And what I usually say is, who lives in your house, which is code for who loves you. where do you find meaning? So that's the faith part. How are you in God these days? Whereas whatever it is that your issue is particularly bad, so what is distressing you? What are you worried about? What's the thing that's stuck? What's the presenting issue? You broke up with your girlfriend, you failed your exam. What's the big rock here that we're worrying about? And then where are the places of goodness and warmth in your life? So, if you're depressed, there'll be moments when your depression is particularly bad, and we should take notice of those. There are also things in people that will make it experience that experience better. So there are moments where you might have actual hope. There are people who might actually make things a little lighter than they would otherwise be. And so what you're trying to do, recognizing that people are always connected and relational beings, recognizing that people need purpose, recognizing that people need community and also meaning, and ultimately Jesus. We say, well, how can we get you to build up the rest of your life? Are you eating? Are you sleeping?
Yeah.
Did you go to church lately? Have you been outside? Do you run around the park? What do you like to do that you haven't done in a while? What's your devotional discipline? These kind of things that build up the rest of your life around whatever the issue is.
Yeah.
And then we say, well, what can we do about the problem itself? Right. So, do you need low-grade brotherly sympathy because your boyfriend just broke up with you? Do you need a special consideration for your exam in view of your mental distress? Do you need some sherpering through the university bureaucracy? Do you need prayer? I always offer prayer at the end of everything. And then having mapped in some ways the context, which for most people I'm not going to know straight away, I then commit it to God and say, look, here is your child, here are the issues they've got, here are the people who love them. Help them lean towards what is good and true and faithful and beautiful, protect them and their lives and their head, so that we don't have a bondage again to fear, but we have power and love and a sound mind. That's promised in the scripture. Through the sources of meaning and goodness, which are important for all people, whatever their faith is. So, lean towards one and help to train people away from the other things. You don't necessarily have to be a specialist in order to map those things, or to offer sources of comfort and help, and judicious advice and counsel. And then we would always do that for anyone who had a really severe mental health difficulties, in combination with a bunch of other people, right, and professional help.
Yeah, I really like that holistic approach. Like, I've been to counselling before, just checking it out, and it was something that I realised it was very focused on, because when I was a student, I dropped out for a reason, and I had a bit of mental distress there, and it was very focused on that feeling, and they didn't ask me and it could have just been the counsellor, I'm not sure, but they didn't ask me those holistic questions like, when are you going to bed? How much are you eating? Are you drinking? Are you getting exercise? Like, are you doing these practical things? And they weren't a Christian, so the spirituality stuff wasn't even touched on. And so I think that's really amazing that you guys can approach things holistically. It's like, how is your physical well-being? Are you doing all the things you know you should be doing? And how is your spiritual well-being? Have you been to church? Have you prayed? And all of those things, and at the same time as, yes, you have this thing going on, let's help you with this, but you're not ignoring every other part of that person. I think that's really special. Okay, I have a personal question. I'm going to start studying soon.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Oh, is this you?
This is me.
Oh, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
What's your subject, Dave?
I'm going into theology.
Good man.
Yeah. And
Oh, no.
That's wonderful. Everybody should learn about God.
yes. So what would your advice be to me as a new student?
In theology. See, I give different advice for different subjects.
Right.
Where are you studying?
Laidlaw.
Laidlaw. Okay.
Love to Laidlaw, still a postdoctoral fellow.
I think the best thing you can do when you're studying theology is to map your community. There'll be your classmates. There'll be a kind of community. Your church will be a kind of community. Both of those are hugely important. And because one of the dangers, I think, of studying theology, but other subjects as well, is that they can become really dry. Really dry, and there are many reasons for that, but the things that breathe life back into it is when you're with people and you're working out, what does this mean for my life?
Yeah.
And paying attention to who you can have good conversations with, because sometimes it's your classmates and sometimes it isn't,
Right.
for a variety of things. And actually that advice would be the same for any other subjects you're studying. Like, who's really interested, even if they've never studied that, they ask good questions or they reflect well, because that keeps you honest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think with theology, one of the dangers is, we can go and study and think we know something. But, I know, and Jesus says this to the wise young ruler, right? Like, he knows all the commandments. He's got the scriptures mapped out. But Jesus says, go and sell everything you have. You've got to stand on what you believe, and people who will keep you honest in that wrestle bring the whole project to life. Yeah.
St. Anselm says that good theology should begin on your knees and end on your knees, or drive you to your knees. So the first thing I'd say is, and it's true for every other discipline as well, stay wonder-struck and curious. We have the inestimable grace of being literate and being able to think and talk and debate and read. That's what university is for. Large portions of the planet are either too war-torn to do that, or they've got other things on their minds. We have a library with hundreds of thousands of books in it. We have every piece of wisdom in human history in my pocket, in my smartphone, and we've never been less interested in reading the books.
Yeah.
So I would say stay curious, stay wonder-struck, rip the guts out of this moment. If you're studying something, study it well. If you've got questions, when I was 21, I wrote a list of questions that I've always wanted to know more about. There were 48 questions. It took me about 20 years to get through them all.
Right.
But I actually have opinions about all of them now. I've read and discovered and discussed, and a lot of them were not in my required coursework.
Yeah.
This an education isn't something that they give you; it's something that you get yourself by reading, by thinking, by prayer, by wisdom. So this is the moment in your life where you still get to discuss things when you're out either in the workforce or in pastoral ministry or doing something else with children, and other commitments in tow. You're not going to be discussing how to interpret 2 Timothy.
Yeah.
Now is your moment to do that. I would also say, remember why you're doing it. So it's really important, especially in theology, but in other places too, that you cultivate your own relationship with Christ, that you continue to give your real self to him and not a false self, that you don't spend so long talking about God that you never talk to him. And the other thing I would say is enjoy the adventure of learning things. Let the things you learn change you and deepen you and make you wiser and braver and deeper. That's what a university education is for. And it's why it should be a full-time job.
Yeah, wow. I think one of the fears I have is that when I studied music, I was super excited about music. I love music so much, and then I went into it, and by the end of the year, I was like, I have no joy for music at all. I don't even want to listen to any music, and so I'm in a different place now than I was then. But I don't want that to happen with God or Christianity.
Yeah.
So.
I think if you develop a good crowd detector, you can triage these things pretty quickly.
Right.
So if the frame that somebody is using is not helpful for you and is making you further away from God and more cynical and more mean and more angry, you've probably got the wrong frame.
Sure.
If the approach you're using isn't fruitful for you, there are 20 million other approaches. There are as many ways to God as there are people. He's not far from each one of us. So what I would say is, don't be afraid. Test everything. Hold fast to that, which is good. But I already said that.
Yeah, no, that's great advice.
Well, and also, come talk to a chaplain.
Yes.
Saved by Cassandra again.
We're friends with Laidlaw. We'll
right.
let you come talk to us.
Oh, cool. I'll make it that. Just sort of, I got a couple more questions. What role does spirituality and Christianity have on university campus?
My homeboy St. Augustine says that all truth is God's truth. So if it's true and good and beautiful, then it will in the end point to God. That's true of science, for which I have a deep love. It's true of theology. It's true of music. It's true of literature. All the other things that are studied on a university campus, if they're done in the right spirit and in the right way, and with the humility that is necessary, in the end, say something true and good. And if it's true and good, in the end, it will point to God. So I would say the role of Christianity and faith on a university campus is to explain to everybody why the things they're doing really matter and the purpose behind all the things. That's true in terms of human values, what makes a human being, what makes human beings flourish. It's true of music and art and literature. You know, how do we represent the world around us and its truth and beauty and reality, and that will point to God. Even in a tragic sense, to look at human beings in the mirror makes us long for a savior and rejoice when he comes. And the same with all the other social sciences, all the other forms of human endeavor. Without God, all of them are incomplete because they don't have. Well, the classic is the ghost in the machine, the crown on the top of the mountain. That explains why all of these things work together. That sense of harmony and order in the world. So I think this part of it that's witness and explaining things. There's part of it that's just good scholarship. So we should have Christian staff and we should have Christian students who are doing their best work and the only Christian work, which is good work and well done. And we should have a voice at the table in terms of dialogue and debate and all the things that we're doing. The university is where the future is forged. And without God, without human and spiritual values, without a value for human beings, we get in big echo very quickly.
I think John's done a great job of outlining the role of Christianity at a university. So I'm going to tackle the term spirituality.
Oh, you should do that.
There's a paper that I've done a little bit of study around spirituality kind of in an academic sense, partly because I really like things to mean something, and the word spirituality is very amorphous. And so if I'm a chaplain and I'm constantly being told I'm doing spiritual care, one question I have is like, so what is that?
Yeah.
But one of the best papers I read is by John Swinton and someone Patterson, and they're writing from the context of psychiatry and nursing psychiatry. And the title of the paper was Towards a Thin and Vaguely Useful Concept of Spirituality, which I hated in one sense because I wanted clarity. But they were making the argument that the term spirituality is a way of pointing to what's not there. To say that with the exile of Christianity for good and for not good reasons out of mainstream society, there's this vacuum. Talking about spirituality is a way of pointing and saying, I think we've lost something here.
Right.
So I think that there continues to be that prophetic role to talk about spirituality in difficult ways that feel like they lack clarity, but points and says there's something about being human that's been left out. And I also think the concept of spirituality, just even whatever that cloud is, will play a role in helping us to recognize the diversity that's already in our midst. It's debatable, whether New Zealand is a secular society.
Yeah.
We're not Christian anymore, but we are very multicultural, and it's a failing of the West that we forget that people actually believe in things.
Yeah.
And that, particularly a university, which is a very diverse place, people believe in stuff. Secularity may not be the norm, and spirituality is a way of recognizing that, pointing to it and saying, let's not assume that no one believes in something more than what we can see right here. How do we recognize that? How do we name that? How do we respect that and honor who that person is, where they've come from?
Nice. How do you guys envision the future of spiritual life or Christianity at UC in particular?
I would love to have a campus in which the place of faith is accepted. We have very good leadership on that, but we've got still a long way to go. A place in which everybody can get the spiritual care that they've asked for, that is appropriate to their faith, and that students like I was, who are students of faith, that conversations about faith are normal. In the same way that we've normalized talking about mental health, or we've normalized talking about any number of other things, that people who have faith can say it and express it and feel like not only that's an okay thing to do, but that's valued and welcomed. I would love to have a stronger partnership with local churches. We have a stronger partnership than we used to have, and we're always looking for ways to make that better. We'd love to have better emphasis on formation and intellectual formation, and be the place where dialogue and discussion and debate happens. And I'd love students of faith who come to UC to find home in a place that they recognise and a place that recognises them. We're still a bit far away from that vision for my liking, but we're making good progress.
Good.
Yeah, I'd second all of what John has said, and as we're, thinking about, ahead of this interview, but just recognizing the struggle of imagining something that isn't there yet. I think a lot of our life, like we've talked about, sort of day to day, hour to hour, improvising, responding to what God is doing, responding to the person in front of us, hoping somehow those things come together. But when we lift our eyes just a little way, that the kind of Christian intellectual life, like John spoke about, that's been part of both of our journeys. And just even imagining, like, what if every department had a collection of Christian staff and students who met together to put the world back together. The exile of Christian thinking from scholarship is a real problem for knowing about the world and talking about it well. And, theology is in one sense narrow and in another sense very broad. It's talking about all things in relation to God. And, that little dream of having these little missionary stations of Christian scholars gathering together to think together, to pray together about, what does my study mean in the light of Christ? I suspect that will only be fulfilled in the new heavens and the new earth. But that would be the hope.
We might get a head start.
We might get a glimpse. We might get a glimpse.
Just a little.
No, that's good. I think those are good visions for university. I think, John, like you said, it should be a place where people can come and have these intellectual conversations and have these debates and faith be accepted the same way as mental health is accepted, and that people need these things. And so are there any final things that you guys want to say? Anything you want to clarify or anything like that?
I have three things to say. One is, if you're clergy, come be a chaplain. It's awesome. The second thing is, if you're a church person, please pray for us. We were kind of drop off the radar not being in parish ministry. We value, we covet, we appreciate your prayers and your practical support when you feel that you can give it. We value all our partnerships with local churches, and we depend on your prayers because the people we minister to are, in some cases, in many cases, your children and your grandchildren. So please do pray for us. And the third thing is, if you're at UC, come see us. We're in Kaupapa 103 in the History and Philosophy building. We got a prayer room, we got an office. We will buy you a coffee and shout you lunch on Wednesdays. There is a place of home and a place of faith and a place of warmth for you if you need it.
Yeah, that sums it up. I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think really second that request for prayers. I also, if there are any church people listening, we do have a newsletter. If you want to be on that, you can get in touch. I only send it out once a semester to say what we're up to.
We will not spam you, we promise.
We will not spam you. What we're up to, and then what our prayer needs are and what our practical needs are. There's always a creative mix of both. So if you want to know more about what's going on, get in touch.
Cool. Well, Cassandra, John, thank you very much for coming and sitting down. It's been great.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, Ethan.
Cheers.